You have now arrived at your destination.
Sid, this is such a joy to do. It's been so long since our last discussion. I was trying to think, it's like 3 or 4 years. I mean, I was young when we last spoke, but thank you so much for joining me again today, Sid.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It feels on one hand like yesterday, and on the other hand, so much has happened since. Thanks for
I
having
mean,
me back.
not at all, but so much has happened. But I do want to start, and for those that missed our last episode, GitLab today, public company, incredible success story. I'd love to just provide some context and go back to the beginning. What was that founding moment, and how did it all start in a very succinct 2 to 3 minutes?
Yeah, it started when I saw GitLab, which was created by my co-founder, Dimitri. He started it because he wanted to have a better way of collaborating at work. And he thought it made so much sense to make that open source. And I thought so too. So GitHub is a DevOps platform, which means you can do anything from planning what you're going to build software-wise to building it, testing it, making it secure, rolling it out, monitoring it, and improving it. And he thought that made so much sense to collaborate. And in the first year, 300 people joined. Today, we have hundreds of people joining every month to make it better. GitLab is being used by millions of people. This deserves more than just an open source project where everyone is just working for the love of it. This needs full-time people, and today GitLab is over 1,500 people.
I mean, it's incredible to see, and also kind of incredible to see the different stories actually of the employees. I know many of your team members, and seeing them talk about bluntly how they live, which is what we're going to come on to next, which is, you've always been a remote first company, many, many years ahead of everyone else who's now doing it. And so I want to hone in here a little bit. And I actually spoke to Darren, your head of remote, before the show, and he said, first of all, a lot of people ask, well, how do you do it? Ask instead why, because as I said, it was a very contrarian thing that you did many years ago. So Darren asks, bluntly, it seems you're wired pretty differently, with remote being the best solution inherently to you. What shaped this? Was it conviction? Was it personal experiences? Why did you always feel it was right?
We started off as a remote company. I hired people. Well, the first person I hired was I was in the Netherlands, and the first person was Martin in Serbia. And then we hired Dimitri in Ukraine. And it kept going like that. And then even if I hired Dutch people, they would come to my house and we would co-work for a few days, and then they would just work from wherever they were. So it organically evolved like that. And then people were skeptical, so we said, look, if it stops scaling, we'll stop doing it. But in fact, remote works better the bigger you are. Like if you're 7 people, it's probably better to be in a room together, if that's practical. If you're 1,500 people, what's the advantage? You can't be in the same room anymore. You can hardly be in the same building. So remote scales a lot better. And because people were skeptical of it, we invested a lot in the things you need to do to be remote. Every company during the pandemic discovered, hey, we can work remote. But what they are not intentional about is facilitating informal communication, because that takes more time and effort. It takes a lot less time and effort and money than having an office building, but you still need to be very intentional about that.
Respectfully then, what do you do to facilitate that informal communication and bring that culture to the scale of remote that you have?
We do a ton, and we give a ton of examples. But one of the things we do is coffee chats. And it's kind of the water cooler chat, maybe. It's very normal at GitLab to plan 25 minutes on someone's calendar and just call it a coffee chat. You don't need an agenda. You don't necessarily need to talk about work. And we normalize that. If you onboard at GitLab, we make you do 5 so that it's very normal. You don't have to do them. Not everyone wants to hang around the water cooler, but at least make it normal to do things like that. And there's 20 other examples on that we list.
What other ones have you found really moved the needle? And also, have you found any that didn't actually work or people found quite annoying? I'm just interested.
There's lots of different ones. I think a hangout as a team every week is very beneficial. We believe in being together in person. We fly everyone in. before and hopefully after the pandemic, to one location to just hang out for a week together. That can be very beneficial. I think what we've always done is make it optional. It's not for everyone. Some people are just very busy. They just want to get their work done, and they're fine. So the demand for it really varies according to who someone is and what phase they are in their life.
Totally get you, and I completely understand that. I do want to ask, you wrote the most incredible kind of remote guide that so many startups use as their centerpiece today, especially also now for kind of larger incumbents who are moving and transitioning towards remote work. And this was Darren again, so I have to give him credit. What do you think are one or two things in there that will require the most effort to implement for those wanting to make the transition?
I think this informal communication is the most important thing. We've talked to a ton of companies, and most of them spend more time on deciding when to get back to the office than how to make remote work while they're not in the office. Also, I think it's a pipe dream that we're going to go back to completely being in the office. Some people are going to be remote, so focus more time on making that work. When people say they long back to the office, they don't mean in the furniture. When companies open back their offices, less than 10% of the people go back. They are longing for that informal communication. It's very natural for your Zoom calls to start on time, to end on time. You need to be intentional about creating time and space to learn more about each other, to build trust. That's essential, and that's what people are longing for, and that's what has been missing in a lot of companies during the pandemic.
I totally agree with you in terms of that being missing. I also love that in terms of kind of how you see the future there. I spoke to Dave at Google Ventures or GV beforehand, and he said really dig in on this one because a lot of startups are thinking about the next 10 years. When you look towards the next 10, 20 years of scaling startups and org design, what's your view on the future of work in terms of kind of remote, partial, full, and how do you think about that? That's from Dave.
I think the future of work, I see a lot of startups are being all remote. They don't even have an office. So that's going to happen, and that's going to happen more and more often. Now, the legacy companies who are going to go full, like, co-located, that's going to work as well. We know that works from before the pandemic. And then there's hybrid. And I think there's a type of hybrid that works and a type of hybrid that doesn't work. The type of hybrid that works is you come into the office some days. And I think companies are going to find out that it should be the same day, so everyone's at the office at the same time. The hybrid that doesn't work is some people are at the office and some people are remote. We think the most talented people in those companies that work remote will leave for a company that's all remote because they want to be on the same level as everybody else.
No, I totally agree in terms of being on the same level as everyone else. If we think about taking your level up a gear, obviously your level of remote is incredible prowess, the OG of remote work. But Darren said, ask how we can still further improve. So when you look at yourself today, what more do you think you can do to improve your level and GitLab's level of remote work?
The hardest thing about remote is time zones. And to overcome time zones, you need to work asynchronously, but that's very, very hard. If I look at my day, I spend almost all my day in calls. If I look at the e-group at GitLab, my reports, then all of them are located in the US. So where we can improve is to work more async and to have an even bigger geographic distribution. We have people in over 60 countries. And I would love for the e-group and our board to reflect that as well.
Can I ask, how many of your calls on reflection do you think are necessary? And what I mean by that is how many of them could be done through async note sharing, comment sharing on Google Docs, Notion, you name the tool that you want. But how much could actually be done without the call, do you think, percentage-wise?
At GitLab, you're not allowed to present in meetings. So I had 2 meetings before this one, 3 actually. One was with my parents. You shouldn't call that a meeting. That was just a call. But I have family calls throughout my morning, and I just plan them in so that work doesn't schedule over them. We had a group conversation about our brand, about marketing our brand, and there was a presentation. There was something you could see, but it's not happening in the call. In the call, it's just Q&A, because that's the part that's harder to do and that you need a synchronous meeting for. The other thing was a prep for this call. It was a 10-minute prep, and there's a really good document about like how I should prepare and all the questions you might ask and everything else. And I was like, well, why is this a synchronous call? Why not, instead of a synchronous call, we do this async. I promise to read the doc and leave my notes. And you get back to Harry a couple of days before and share the notes I already took. Because some of the questions you might ask today, I send a link. Wouldn't it be fun for you to at least have the opportunity to read that link? So let's try, like if I gotta impress anybody about how good we are at remote, it's Harry. So let's try to show that at least we try to do our very best working asynchronous.
Listen, I totally agree with you. I often look at most of my day and I'm like, fuck, that could have been done over email and, document sharing. So I'm totally with you there. I do want to ask, when you think about the evolution of the company, we've got many, many mutual friends. We mentioned Dave at Google Ventures just there. He said it's been incredible to see you evolve as a leader specifically. When you kind of reflect on your own style of leadership, I guess first, how would you describe your style of leadership? And then second, how has it changed over time, as I'm sure it has done?
Yeah, so the top 3 values at GitLab are results, iteration, and transparency. So I strive to be a leader who's transparent, who iterates, so always looking for the smaller thing that could be done faster. And the company is all about results and making decisions based on results. And as for the evolution, I've learned to delegate more, I've learned to be more patient, and I've learned to give more context so that people could make a decision on their own.
Can I ask, in terms of the transparency, are there any limits to transparency? Are there any boundaries? Is it salaries? Is it, I often say to startups, never involve team in M&A discussions or progress because it's unhelpful and it's unproductive. Don't actually say about fundraising. It reduces morale if they know that it's dragging on. There is a limit to transparency. I always say, how do you feel about that?
Because we're transparent by default, we have the longest list of things that aren't transparent. So if you Google GitLab communication, you'll find a long list, I think it's over 17 items of things that aren't transparent. And that includes salaries, that includes M&A. It doesn't include fundraising, but it really depends on your market and how you're going with that. It was a stretch, and we had a fundraising Slack channel where we kept people updated, but we knew we were an attractive company and the market was good. So I think you have to make that decision, but it's certainly that is a very hard thing to do, because as the subject in that channel said, it's going to be a roller coaster, and there's going to be lots of no's, but we only need one yes.
You mentioned also iteration there. Another commonality, and I know all of our friends who I spoke to said about your rate and desire for learning being unparalleled. And so if we go to that, how do you think about getting as much feedback as possible from your team, customers, investors? And then how do you determine the feedback to accept versus reject?
So getting feedback, I think most people are naturally inclined to give feedback. It's just that sometimes they see that the messenger is not rewarded for giving that. So you got to be very, very cautious of making sure you're open to feedback, thanking people for it, and making that a very normal thing, and never dinging someone for feedback. Like, one of the most horrible things ever said at GitLab was, how come that person has time to complain about this? Like, that is like blaming the messenger, and that is not okay. And I think at GitLab we do a great job of that. And then feedback doesn't have to be correct in order for you to welcome it. Like, there's 2 phases. There's just being thankful that someone's giving feedback, and then you decide what to accept, and you do that based on the frequency with which you hear something, the source you get it from. Like, our lead independent board member Godfrey, I would take that more serious than someone on Twitter that I don't know. And also, what's the specialty of the source? Is that person really good in XYZ that they're giving feedback about or not?
Can I ask, in terms of like the feedback, you said there about kind of rewarding people for it. How do you make people physically feel, you are incredibly personable, humble, great bloke, as we'd say in the UK, Sid. But you're still the CEO, and people will inherently just be a little bit more intimidated, especially if they're kind of lowering the company transparently. How do you make it a environment of culture and a culture of like safety and security where they can say, Sid, I didn't like the way that you actually said that, and it made me feel uncomfortable? How does one create that environment where they can say that?
I think situations where you're giving feedback in a group setting are the most important, because there people can see what happens. Also, it's really important that people never get in trouble for their feedback. So I think in group settings, when someone has feedback, being thankful for it. And also, like, being humble about, sometimes you kind of know, like this morning when I gave the feedback, hey, we should share the doc with Harry up front. I was just starting my day. I wasn't at my best, but that's no excuse for delivering that feedback in a way that wasn't pleasant and that wasn't constructive. So I did a bit of damage control. I said, look, you did nothing wrong, but still that wasn't good. So sometimes and if you criticize yourself from time to time, it's easier for other people to do the same.
I think you're a bit hard on yourself, Sid.
You weren't in that call, Harry.
Okay, this is true, to be fair, but I can't imagine you getting angry. You're always so calm and level-headed. But we said about kind of async, and we said about feedback. A lot of your investors said about this written culture that you have very much embedded within GitLab. First, what does a written culture really mean and feel like to you? And I guess what are the biggest pros and cons of having that written culture so central?
Yeah, and about the first thing, maybe I'm not angry, but I do care a lot. And if it's a subject I care about a lot, it sometimes I make the point bigger than it should be. And then a written culture means you write things down.
Can I just interrupt? Sure. Sorry, I'm changing. How do you temper yourself too? Because I had a situation today, and I'm asking your advice here, where it's exactly the same as you. I just care intensely about my business like you do yours. And if I feel like someone is not helping me get to where we should be, I get very angry, especially if it's born out of laziness or lack of care. How do you temper your emotion as a leader? Because actually, it's not helpful getting angry.
It's hard, and what we try to do at GitLab, which is super hard, but like, don't question people's intentions. So I agree that some people have a harder time motivating themselves, but I think laziness is almost a shortcut that's too easy, like what's going on in their life. And that might not be an excuse to do it, but I think most of the times when I'm lazy, it's because I have too of a high bar for the output and the end result, and I procrastinate and try not to do it. So maybe it's something like that. We're all humans. We all, like, I might be, I'm trying to be as level-headed as I can, and I think I do a good job. But that doesn't mean you're always at your best, and nobody is. And I think it's kind of fun to work with humans instead of robots and to vary your style. One of the things I like most is the situational leadership theory and strategy, where you vary your style based on what happens. I've made a blog post in November with 19 factors I can consider, and I sometimes do consider, when to delegate something. And that's kind of the name of the game, like who's on the other side, and how should you vary your style. And I think that makes being a leader more interesting, and I'm never going to master it, but it's fun getting better at it.
Listen, I totally agree with you. In terms of kind of transitioning the styles there, we mentioned about the written culture. I would love to ask, what does that written culture mean to you? Because it is a big change in the style of leadership and how companies and orgs are run today. So how do you think about what a written culture means and the pros and cons of having such a strong one?
So we have a strong written culture, and it shows in our handbook of over 2,000 pages where we detail how we work. The enormous benefit is that there's less synchronous time needed. Like, you're less likely to be stuck and need to ask something to someone before you can continue. I think one of the drawbacks of writing is that it can be time consuming, especially if something needs to happen fast and you don't know how much context the other person has. Because now you need to kind of write down everything the other person could possibly not know. And that takes a lot of time. If you have more time, you just send something short and they can ask a question. If you know the other person has the context, you can have a shorter text message like you would have with a partner, both in business and in personal life. So I think there's a benefit to it, but if something is really important and has to happen really fast, and it includes a wide group where not everyone has the context, I think synchronous communication is better.
I totally agree with you in terms of that. I do want to ask, in terms of, we mentioned Dave earlier. He mentioned how important a role you've played in terms of mentoring some of his companies and working with companies that he's worked with. I'm intrigued, how do you think about the role of mentorship today as a leader? And I guess, what would you advise young people today when it comes to mentors?
Mentorship is super important. I've been helped by a ton of people in my career, and I really enjoy mentoring kind of both startup companies and kind of promising people at GitLab. I think what I see sometimes is that people reach out and ask whether you want to be their mentor. And I think that's unlikely to be a yes from me, but I think also from other people. I think you want to start small, iterate maybe. But you want to reach out and say, look, I got this problem. This is why it's super important for me to solve it. This is what I think about it. This is what I would do if I wouldn't talk to you. This is why I think you're like the most qualified person in the world to help me with that. Could we hop on a 10-minute call to have a back and forth? I think you're much more likely to find your mentor that way than just a cold reach out.
Listen, I totally agree with you. Can I ask, Sid, who are your mentors today? And if you have one or two big takeaways that you really think on from them?
There's a ton of people. I think the most important people have been my CEO coaches and also the board members. Now, board members are not mentors per se. They're your boss, which is very different. But still, there's an enormous amount of things you can learn. And for example, Godfrey Sullivan, our lead independent, he helps me with the situational leadership, like varying my style. I think with the CEO coaches, right now it's Marissa, and before it was John Hamm. And John Hamm, his most impactful statement was when our quarter was looking really, really bad. So this is years ago. We were going to miss the quarter by 30%. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to get fired. I was like a deer in the headlights. And John said, look, first of all, you're not going to get fired. Second of all, they know a startup is up and down, but they want you to completely understand the problem and have a plan on how to deal with it. And that sounds trite. That sounds so simple, but that was so useful. And for I had 2 weeks until the board meeting. I learned everything about the problem, and it was with our sales cycle and deals getting stuck and things like that. And I started off the board meeting with a half-an-hour presentation with everything that was wrong and everything we were going to do about it. And the only response was from Vili, Sid, don't do any crazy things. He meant don't close any deals on kind of bad terms in order to make the quarter, which we never have. But they saw I understood the problem and what we were going to do about it.
Listen, I absolutely love that. Can I ask, in terms of the CEO coaches, how do you work with them? You mentioned, John there and Marissa. How do you work with them? How long do you stay with each one for? How do you advise founders and CEOs who are contemplating, do I get a CEO coach? Do I not get one? I've heard that they're valuable, but is it really for me? How do you think about that?
If you're the CEO of a fast-growing company, I would totally recommend it. I think the nice thing is you get the best possible CEO coach who will have you. Just like everything in all the relationships, you'll have to work for this one. So it's kind of a two-way recruiting process. So you find out via other people who the good coaches are. They all are busy. They will never have time. So you gotta make it interesting to them to take you on as a coachee. So you gotta convince them that you're a great person at a great and a promising company. And then typically, I think a few years, you stay with them. It depends on what stage your company is at. It's important that the coach has seen that stage of company before. And I think after you outgrow a coach, you move on to the next one. Also, there's kind of they're sharing their life knowledge, and at some point you've learned a lot of what you're gonna learn from them.
Yeah, no, listen, I totally agree. How do you know when you've reached that asymptote of information that you've learned from them? And what I mean by that is, how do you know when the value's plateaued and actually it may be time to get a new coach? Nothing on them, but just the time is right. Is there a signal or a sign?
This is not an exact science, but it's leveling off, and you start hearing the same things more and more.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I think it's the same for my personal therapist, but I think that's a different story, Sid.
I think it's very similar, and some CEO coaches kind of overlap with therapists, and I think most people prefer to keep it separate, which I think makes a ton of sense.
Oh, I think ideally separate is best. I rarely have strong opinions, but that one I think is probably a good thing to keep separate. I do want to ask, you have this fascinating purview now, Sid, with being obviously, managing the board with GitLab, but now you're also a board member. You're a board member for Meltano, very exciting. If we start on, bluntly, your managing of the board, what have been some of your big lessons in terms of what it takes to manage a board successfully? I think it's super hard. Founders are not born knowing how to manage a board. What do you know now that you wish you'd known when you started in terms of board management, and what does it take to manage successfully?
Yeah, for context for people seeing the show, Meltano is a spinout of GitLab. So GitLab has a big ownership in that, and that's the reason I'm on that board with Dave, which is super fun. I think in our own board meetings, we found out that people don't like being presented to for the majority of the board meeting. So presentations are great to kind of get people started, but you don't want to spend 3/4 of the time in presentation. Now, at GitLab, we've taken that to a bit of an extreme where we send video clips of us presenting the slide deck up front, and if we do presentations, it's like 2 minutes. It's as a warm-up to get in that mind space again for everyone. Another thing which might be very helpful is, what do you want help on? There's a ton of startups that have board decks, and they don't say what they need help on. And now you have board members trying to add value, and they start talking about things where they're not interested. It's not high enough priority. They already know what to do. Stop talking about it. But you can't tell that to a board member. So now you've got this advice, you got to follow up on it, and after the board meeting, you're like, first of all, that was a waste of time. Second of all, I got this page full of stuff I got to follow up on, and I got another page of the stuff I actually got to work on that I made. Now, what's super important is that before the board meeting, you say, these are the 3 things I would really love feedback on, I could use help on. Tell them what to help you with. Otherwise, they'll try to find it themselves, and they probably wouldn't know as good as you because you're running the company.
No, listen, I totally agree in terms of like be very clear about what you need. On the flip side, I'm interested, now sitting on the Meltano board and being a board member, not managing that board, like how have you found that? And then what have been some lessons in terms of what you can do to be the best board member? And also like help me, I'm on boards. What can I do to be the best board member?
I think one thing I was really afraid of is that I put myself too much on the operator seat. You see that with kind of, especially with current CEOs. Like I'm in execution mode most of the day, like making decisions and planning activities and giving suggestions. As a board member, you should really only be asking questions and getting informed. And I'm very cautious of doing the right thing there. And so far it's going pretty decent, although we should ask Douwe and not me. And then great board members are, in my view, very knowledgeable, very high signal to noise. They don't want to show off in the board meeting. They don't have to impress other people with how marvelous they are. Everyone in the board knows kind of this is a good board and everyone is marvelous. They don't need to talk to get that confirmation. They're very certain of themselves. And they tend to have a specialty. Like they tend to be really good in a few things, and those specialties should augment each other.
Can I ask for your help and advice, Sid? When you have a challenging situation and a board member has feedback which is helpful, but it's direct and it's about a tough problem that the company is facing, I'm always challenged by, should I say to you, Sid, can we just have 5 minutes at the end and me and you'll discuss it? Or should I bring it up with you head on in the board meeting and bluntly challenge you on it? Not in a horrible way, but challenge you in front of everyone else, because then you do get the benefit of the crowd and their opinion, but you could also seem like you're confronting the CEO in a more afflicting situation. What's the right answer there?
I think, is it a company problem or is it a CEO problem?
So it's a company problem. It's a company problem. Strategy around go-to-market.
Strategy is wrong. I think that's exactly what a board meeting should be about. So you should bring it up in the board meeting. I think what's really important is that a CEO never has to say to a company, hey, the board wants to do X, Y, Z. So as a CEO, you should be very cautious of never saying that. Either you disagree with the board member, just fight it out, or you accept it, and now it's your opinion. But the board is not running the company. And at GitLab, we allow a ton of people in board meetings, and that's a risk that you have to manage. So when you call out that the strategy is kind of going sideways, make sure that you don't tell them what to do. Don't tell them change the strategy to X, Y, Z. You're just there to ask questions, but the questions can be tough and challenging, and you can say like, look, that's not a very convincing data point that you're basing that strategy on.
I'm too interested. You said the board meetings are a little bit larger than normal. How do you structure who gets invited to the board meeting, how long the board meetings are, just the formalities? How do you actually structure them? I'm interested.
So we have a great page on board meetings. So if you Google GitLab board meetings, you'll find more information. Those of us are 1.5 hours open session and then about 45 minutes closed session. So it's not 5 minutes you should do a closed session. You should do it for 45 minutes, and then about 30 should be with the CEO, and then 15 without the CEO to evaluate her performance. And we've started something else. We do kind of I don't know, we don't call it a kickoff of the board meeting, but we do a small closed session before the board meeting. And it's to give the board context on some additional context on like, what do we want to get out of this? What are things to really pay attention to? What do we really want your opinion on? And also like who to praise in the board meeting. Like who are my reports who will be there, who did an outstanding job and should get some praise from the board for that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you, especially on the praise element. We've mentioned kind of board meetings, board members. Final one before the quickfire, but a lot of your cap table told me how rigorous and stringent you were around investor selection, which is always a great thing to be. But my question to you on the back of that was, when you think through the cap table that you've assembled, which is incredible, why did you choose the people you did? Like, how do you base your investor selection criteria for you?
So this is now in our past. We're a public company. So the last time we got to select was at our IPO. And look, you select firms with a good reputation, that they're constructive. And then you select people. Frequently, they're going to be your new board member, the lead investor in a round. So you elect people who you could have a great board meeting with. And what I did, for example, in our B round, I kind of had, calling it a mock board meeting is too far, but I went through our strategy and kind of waited for them to kind of we discussed and asked them to add value. And then what you get back, hopefully that you select the person who can contribute the most.
Yeah, no, listen, I'm totally with you, especially in terms of focusing on the person and that relationship is central. I do want to move into my favourite, Sid. You know the drill. I say a short statement, you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm terrified with this one because I'm sure you read endlessly. But what's the favourite book and why?
High output management. And I love how kind of situational leadership is kind of woven into that.
Tell me, what is the hardest element of your role with GitLab today?
We're a functional company, so cross-functional initiatives are the hardest thing to do well.
Why is that?
Because it's always hard to cross organizational boundaries. So you can select, you have three options. You can structure your company according to functions, and then cross-functional things will be hard. You can structure your company across projects, and then career development will be hard. Or you can have a matrix organization, and then your whole life will be hard.
Oh dear, I love that. What is the one thing about GitLab that most people do not understand, Sid?
That DIY DevOps is dead. Like the area of selecting 10 best-in-class solutions for DevOps and then having custom integrations between them that you maintain, that is no longer working. It's both not leading to a good outcome, and it's way too much effort.
Interesting kind of change of topic here. What does the future? I got obviously a little birdie told me about this one. What does the future of cities look like to you?
I think there will be more cities. They will be more differentiated and opinionated, and they will be more welcoming. They will have a recruiting department.
I think Francis Suarez in Miami is doing a good job on that one. I do have to ask, how do you think through your personal investments today, Sid?
Well, considering what this podcast is about, I started Open Core Ventures together with Betty as a COO, and we create companies around open source projects. So I think that returns in venture are moving earlier and earlier, and we're investing before there's a company because we're creating it.
I absolutely love it. Can I ask, what is this? Sorry, I'm just intrigued. What does the structure look like to those deals? So you co-create it with the company and it's like 50-50 with the founder, or your co-founder? How does that look in terms of the structure?
We create the company, we put 2 million in, and then we typically recruit a CTO who has been a contributor to the open source project. We work with the CTO to hire a few people that they really want to work on the project full time. And then we start creating an open core offering, so a proprietary offering, some proprietary code that people can pay for. And then when that is done, we recruit a CEO to join the company. And at that stage, before the first external round, we typically have the majority of the company.
Love that. It's a super exciting new project. Next one. Tell me, you can have a billboard anywhere in the world. What does it say and where is it?
We had it, and the billboard was on the 101, and it said GitLab, the one DevOps platform. And it talked about what we do for customers. At T-Mobile, they were able to increase their deployment frequency by 10x by using GitLab. They got 10 times as many changes out the door because they could work in a single application.
I love it. It's that and the Goldman are pretty impressive stats. Tell me, penultimate one, what's your biggest weakness and what are you doing to change it, Sid?
I could be more positive in meetings. And what I do is I have CEO shadows who attend like 80% of my meetings, and they rate me for every single meeting, and I see those ratings.
I love that. I think I probably need the same. I'm known as the cynical one, so maybe we share this in common. And then final one, what do the next 10 years hold for you and GitLab, Sid? If we have this chat in 10 years' time, which I hope is much, much less, but say it's 10 years, what would you like to have happened?
What's happening is that the DevOps platform market, Gartner predicts it will go from 20% today to I think it's 60% 2024. So we have this amazingly rapid adoption of platforms, and then those platforms with GitLab as the leading one will kind of consume more and more of the tool chain. All in all, DevOps is currently a $40 billion market, and that is still growing at a very rapid rate. So that's what we're going after.
Sid, I always love our chats. I can't thank you enough for putting up with the questions that went a little bit off schedule, but it's always fantastic to chat, and so really appreciate the time.
Harry, it's the pleasure's all mine. Thanks so much.